Thank you for viewing this video on barriers in facility and introducing accessible housing among children, youth, young adults with disabilities and governments. We know that children and youth with disabilities are more likely to live in conditions of poor housing need. For instance, homes in need of major repairs, unsuitable housing, crowded, or unaffordable housing. Lacking adequate space in the home for children with disabilities can cause issues with storing medical equipment and results in a negative impact on their development and sensory processing. Children and youth with disabilities and their families often encounter many barriers in finding and obtaining accessible housing. No existing published reviews examining the barriers and facilitators of accessible housing for children and youth with disabilities exist. Our objective was to understand the barriers and facilitators to obtaining accessible housing among children and youth and young adults with disabilities and their families. To conduct this scoping review, we searched 7 databases for empirical studies involving a sample of children or youth with a disability and published in a peer-reviewed journal. There were 38 studies that met our inclusion criteria. Of the studies that reported housing status, the majority of families owned their home. Our review highlighted the barriers and facilitators to obtaining accessible housing. For barriers, studies reported on rates in accessible housing, which ranged from 10% to 91% among children with disabilities and their families. Common types of accessibility barriers included lack of space, safety concerns, uneven paths, inadequate doorways, and inaccessible stairs, bathrooms, and kitchens. Children with disabilities and their families found the process of obtaining accessible housing difficult to navigate. They also had limited ability to meet home modifications, especially those who lived in rentals. Cost and lack of funding were also challenges to housing accessibility, as families experiencing financial hardship could not afford home modifications. Studies also reported that individual factors affected the ability to obtain an accessible home or make modification. For instance, bias against racially minoritized people with disabilities prevented much-needed home modification. Inaccessible housing led to increased stress and negative effects on health and well-being. For facilitators, some families were able to make their homes more accessible by moving to a new house, adding extra space, and modifying existing spaces. Common types of home modifications included separate bathrooms for children with disabilities and other safety designs. Studies described that funding facilitated home modifications and access to accessible housing. Other aspects that made homes accessible included planning and involvement in the home adaptation process, along with good communication between families and professionals. Accessible housing led to improved health and well-being, greater family interaction, reduced caregiver burden, and better use of space within the home. In terms of implications, there is an urgent need to provide children with disabilities with accessible housing. To do so, children and families require greater financial support for home modifications, better access to subsidized housing, permission to modify rental housing, and enhanced communication and collaboration with housing stakeholders. For future directions for research, there is a need to explore accessible housing experiences and challenges of additional types of disabilities that have received less attention. There is also a need for more research focused on perspectives of children and youth, not only caregivers and stakeholders. Thanks again for viewing this video. Feel free to scan the QR code to read the article. For any questions, please contact trail@hollandwoodview.ca.